Hello and welcome to the swim brief, everybody. Our regularly scheduled programming will be back later in the week. I'm almost fully recovered from childcare Mageddon here in DeSantis life. And, I just thought I'd take a moment to put a little solo cast up. Sometimes I manage to break through with a lucid thought in between people asking me for a snack or to fix a piece of a Lego construction for me. And, I try my best to sort of furiously scribble some notes down so that when I go to record something like this, I will, be able to give you something useful. So here's the thing I want to talk about, and it's a real hot button topic. So I'm going to try to talk about it as sensitively as possible. I don't have massive takeaway recommendations here, but I do have stuff that I think will provoke some thought, and I think it's worth a lot of us thinking about these issues. So I want to talk about essentially, and we'll get into some of these terms I'm about to use and what are the right terms to use, and what can't we sort of escape in this whole discussion. But essentially, I think one of the multi-million dollar questions in sports is how can we talk to athletes in a constructive way about their body composition? Or for most people, how can I tell athletes they're fat? Right? Is probably what most people are thinking in their mind when they hear that. Now, um, just to sort of back up and give some of my own personal um, baggage on this issue. I have firsthand experience being mocked, singled out, essentially for being overweight when I was an athlete. Um, the first person who did that was actually my college swim coach, who would say things, to elicit a laugh about my weight in front of my teammates. So my teammates quickly learned that, it was fair game to make fun of me. I was actually overweight for a lot of my college swimming career, despite the fact that I was, you know, doing all the dry land training doubles 3 days a week. I was probably putting in excess of 20 hours a week of swimming training, a lot of it voluntary, and and yet I was overweight during that time. As an adult or an older adult, looking back, it's pretty clear to me why that was, but it certainly didn't help to have a bunch of people making fun of me at the time. Everything culminated, I've told this story in a number of other contexts, with my teammates actually had like a whiteboard where they made formal predictions for me, um, and how much weight I would gain within the first 6 months of retiring. I just did air quotes for those of you listening, from college swimming. And unfortunately, the highest estimate that was on the board was the one that ended up being correct. So that said, I'm pretty sensitive to people who describe, um, big negative impact from the way people discuss their body in front of them in a sporting context, right? It's pretty easy to figure out what not to do. I think that's a pretty obvious what not to do. Um, but I think we essentially live in a sports space where we have a bunch of people doing bad stuff. I mean, I'm reminded, of course, in recent memory of the story out of Denmark where national team coaches were doing worse than what I experienced, actually publicly weighing athletes and demeaning them based on the results of their weigh-ins. And that was a large scandal. That's been a practice at a number of places in the United States. Even at my first college coaching job, we did not. I guess we thought we were doing it right. My head coach decided we would not weigh the women, but we would weigh the men on our college swim team, and update that several times throughout the year. Now, most people have decided now that that's bad. And I think overall that's positive. You certainly want to avoid harmful coaching practices. And I think the way that most um, coaches and people around sports know to talk to athletes to the extent that they know anything is probably wrong in terms of what they actually do and the impact of it. Anything that elicits some sort of shame response from the person on the other end, I could say from personal experience, is not likely to have a positive effect on them. In fact, it's probably going to have exacerbate whatever is going on. And I think in a lot of cases, and I'll sort of lead into this next part of the conversation, there is something going on. I mean, if I use myself as an example, to have somebody training that hard, putting in that much time to be in a sport where, it's not like I was a golf player taking some shots off the tee. I was spending a lot of time every week on making my body physically fit for a very physical fitness demanding sport. So it in some ways it should have been hard for me to be overweight. And yet, because of where I was at that time, because of a lot of the things that I was struggling with, it came quite naturally to me, especially at certain points where I was doing worse. I mean, for one thing, one simple way, especially for a lot of college athletes that you end up in this position, is by absolutely abusing the heck out of alcohol. And that's something I did when I was a college athlete. I maybe at that time took greatest pride in my drinking prowess. Probably it's times more pride in that than my actual athletic prowess. And yeah, slamming back, thousands of calories in alcohol and all the sort of cascade negative habits around nutrition and eating that are concurrent with that certainly can, despite you training pretty hard, and also limit your capacity in training. So it can make a gigantic difference. And I hope nobody would argue, right, that abusing alcohol is a positive in anybody's life. I was also deeply depressed for a lot of that time. And of course, that depression, in my case, always led to overeating. It always has for my entire life. And so I'm reminded of a story that I heard when I was studying for my positive psychology degree. A woman had come in and, this was like a sports story. And I'm so hungry for any sports stories at this time because I'm the first athletic coach to be in here. And a lot of the stuff, is being talked about in maybe an educational context, or there's a business context, and a lot of sports stories being shared around. And this woman comes in and she's talking about her son had started playing baseball. And this resonated with me too, because I was an awful little league baseball player, so bad that my mom later told me that a lot of other parents would ask her if I had properly working vision. I was that bad at hitting and catching a ball. So her son had started playing Little League baseball and was not very good. In fact, probably was the worst player on his team. Again, I can relate to that. And the kid would come to her and be really disheartened and say, Mom, I'm not really having very much fun. I'm the worst player on the team. And Mom, because how else might you naturally respond as a parent, would seek to sort of soothe him. And she would say, that's not true. You're not the worst player on the team. And, you're good at things, and sort of, and she realized over time, that her son's experience was getting worse and worse doing the sport. And he kept on returning to her with this complaint, I'm the worst player on the team. And over time, the revelation she had was she realized that what she was communicating to her son who was really struggling with something. He was playing, he was practicing. He didn't want to be bad at baseball. He wanted to be good at baseball. And every time he tried to talk to her about that problem, she denied that it existed. She essentially said, "Oh, no, 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 you are whatever's really bothering you. It's just not true." And by doing so, over time, she sort of blocked him from getting some kind of relief, getting some kind of help for what he was truly struggling with. And, so I think in the context of sports, we have, in many situations, a lot of people who are struggling with their mental health. They're struggling with their eating habits, concurrent with some mental health problems. They may be struggling with substance abuse. And because we have essentially decided either you talk about one of the consequences of this, which one of the indicators of this, which may be that they are overweight despite training really hard for something. Either you're discussing it and exacerbating the situation, or just don't talk about it. And I certainly think if you don't know what to say, and I'm in that camp, I literally do not know what to say, you're better off saying nothing. But I don't think that long term, for the health and well-being of the people that are involved in sport, it's actually productive to say nothing in those situations. And the answers about how to handle that as a coach are really not obvious. But I think when we just fully retreat from discussing when we see athletes that we have struggling, what we communicate to them is, I'm not comfortable with the fact that you're struggling, and I don't want to talk about it. And we further isolate the people that we desperately want to help, right? We want to be able to help them in those contexts. I think, to add another layer to this, and this is an observation I've been thinking a lot about recently as well, is you're just going to see, I think this is like a dirty little secret that almost nobody wants to admit, that as you get up to higher and higher level of performances in sport, the risk for your mental health actually grows. We think of sports as something, I think all of us at our core hope that it's a positive experience for the people involved in it, that it, and it can do so much in terms of just your confidence and your self efficacy and your sort of self actualization in life. Athletics can do, and sports can do so much for you. I believe that 100%. But there is, for many people, or in any field or in anything that is positive for you, it's the risk of doing too much. And how do we define too much? Well, I think one way we define too much is that we start to have negative side effects, right? If you take certain vitamins and minerals in excess, like essential things for your life, all of a sudden you're going to start having negative consequences from taking them, despite the fact that they are, quote, good for you, right? So when you get to doing too much, well, you start to experience some really negative side effects. And a lot of those side effects can be in your mental health. Just plain and simple. Okay, so you actually, the more time and dedication you bring to it, you raise your risk of mental health challenges. And I think nobody wants to admit that, because it's not a good sales pitch for elite sports, right? Try to be your best. You may be risking your mental health, right? It's in fact, probably something most of us are uncomfortable saying out loud, because We don't want to um, have more reasons out there why people might not want to commit to be their best. But it's true. It's true. It's just in the same way that, you know, if if you, I don't know, throw a baseball more times, it's definitely more risk to hurt your shoulder than if you don't throw a baseball, right? Now, if we can admit that, then there's a legitimate conversation to be had about what we can do to offset some of those negative side effects, right? Or the potential for those negative side effects. And to me, that is where, very selfishly, I think that positive psychology has a huge role to play. Because if we go back to the shoulder example, I still think that positive psychology's role in all of this is essentially prehab of the mind, so that you are, just in the same way you might strengthen and sort of give appropriate developmental steps to a shoulder so that it can tolerate a baseball season's worth of pitches thrown, so too must we sort of prepare the mind to be resilient in increasingly challenging situations. If we really want to push our best, we can't expect to not have some way of explicitly and developmentally, okay, step by step, preparing our mind for what's coming. You need to be able to get yourself ready such that, first off, you raise the ceiling for when that risk part comes into play, but you can also sort of offset negative side effects ahead of time. And in my opinion, I think most people would agree with this in the context of sports. It's, you know, I don't know what is the saying? An ounce of preparation is worth, like a pound of whatever comes after preparation. I should have had that one handy, but it's true. Okay, so positive psychology is all about preparing your mind for challenging situations that are coming up, so that because the more situations that you can be resilient in, the more opportunity for growth you have. And if you can continue to grow, okay, well, you're going to be able to face bigger challenges, even greater challenges in the future. And if you raise that ceiling for growth, it's going to take you longer to get to a place where you're extremely frustrated in your progression. And so, again, I don't have a lot of concrete advice. I know we started with the topic of, talking to athletes about their body composition, and maybe that's $1 million question that we're never going to answer. And maybe the answer really is that we as coaches don't end up really discussing that symptom, but we have a way to open communication at a much more fundamental level, about, we can see that that's a side effect of some of the things I described, right? Of mental health and substance abuse issues, right? And we have a way and some methodology for then starting that conversation and helping people that we're coaching who may be experiencing those mental health struggles and substance abuse issues as a side effect of the level of commitment, so that we change our perception. You see how I just said that? You change your perception from this person is essentially a lazy person who's not doing what it takes to this is a person who is pushing so hard that they've gotten to this point where they're actually starting to do behaviors that are counterproductive to them being at their best. I think one of the things I think is that's amazing that certainly it's not like mission accomplished in this respect, but I can remember the difference from when I'm growing up to now, the way people talk in general about substance abuse, the fact that more and more people accept, for instance, that alcoholism and substance abuse issues are a disease, and the way that has destigmatized and deshamed some of those things so that more people can say, yes, of course I was an alcoholic, right? And then it became, sort of lowered the barrier of entry for them getting help. I wonder if there is a future in sports where in some way we can destigmatize, okay, and take away this energy that says to people who maybe are training really hard for something and yet still find themselves paradoxically looking or feeling out of shape because they're still abusing substances or overeating or both, right? And that becomes not some moral failing or some weakness in them, but simply a disease, a malady that they are struggling with. But I don't think we ever get there in a world where we just say it doesn't exist and we're not going to talk about it. So I hope this was a good conversation starter for you. If you want more like that, you can always reach out and contact me. If you're interested in more topics like this, I'm always happy to discuss in greater detail than I do here on just a few minutes on a podcast. But that's what's on my mind at the moment. I appreciate everybody listening. And as I said, we'll be back later this week. The normal podcast, lots to discuss. Of course, a whole World Championships that I'll make sure that Joel watches so he can give you some opinions. Actually, I know he's watched and I give some opinions. So I can't wait to work through that. And I look forward to sharing that with you guys very soon.